Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well, and thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video. And today we're going to be talking about a new anthology series coming from Marvel Animation under Marvel Studios that's simply titled Eyes of Wakanda, which as of dropping this review just dropped its 4 episodes on Disney+. It is a 4-episode animated anthology series with most of the episodes running about 30 minutes, and it's set within the MCU's sacred timeline, and it follows Wakanda's elite spies, war dogs, as they retrieve stolen vibranium artifacts across different eras. The show is created and showrun by Todd Harris and boasts the executive producer of Ryan Coogler, who of course directed and wrote the 2 Black Panther films. The film also has an ensemble cast of people including like Winnie Harlow, Cress Williams, Anika Noni Rose, Patricia Belcher, and more. And going into this show, I was looking forward to a new Marvel Animation piece of content when it comes down to the things that they've released under this banner of Marvel Animation that Marvel Studios has done. I've really enjoyed most of it. When it comes down to What If, I thought that was a really strong start to the series, and while the final season wasn't everything I wanted it to be, it was still plenty of fun to watch. And equally, I really loved Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man from last year, and I think most people really fell in love with X-Men 97, which is probably the best thing to come out under Marvel Animation or Marvel Studios Marvel Animation. So with all that said, going into a new show set in Wakanda, in a world that I think people would love to spend more time in within the MCU, because while we have had some of the Avengers films that have spent time there, and of course the Black Panther films, it is a world that hasn't had enough MCU treatment. And if you're familiar with comic books and some of the older cartoons and certain video games, then you know there's a lot of rich storytelling that can be done in the world of Wakanda. Now with all that said, I'll start off with the animation here, which is completely different than the style of 3D animation that we saw in something like Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man or in What If. They're completely different styles. And on one hand, I really appreciate that all of the different things that have come out under Marvel Animation have been very different stylistically in terms of how the characters look, in terms of how it's animated in general, and how the action plays out. I would definitely say that X-Men 97 is my favorite, but I also grew up on more traditional 2D animated comic book shows and movies. So when it comes down to, you know, the more 3D animated stuff we have these days, while I certainly enjoy cool stylized versions of different kind of approaches, I think sometimes it can all start to feel a little bit samey. Now I'll go ahead and just be honest in saying that I think Eyes of Wakanda for me probably has my least favorite animation style of the various Marvel animations that we've gotten thus far. But that's not to say that I thought the animation was bad here, because there are moments in terms of the lighting, the colors, and just kind of leaning in to the overall aesthetic of the costumes and the locations that you can go to within Wakanda and some of the other historical set pieces that we're in within the show. There is some really nice lighting, there's some nice colors, there's some nice cool moments of action that are all heightened by this 3D animation. But I think what I struggled with the most was the character designs. Just the proportions of their faces and the way that the characters looked at times came off a little goofy, and there were moments that very much felt like animation that you would have seen for television in the 2000s. That doesn't mean that I necessarily thought it was bad, but just at times that I felt like the characters just looked kind of goofy, and some of their faces at times, especially when speaking, didn't always look as clean as I think other Marvel animated things. Or even if I'm just looking at stuff that's dropping on Disney Plus in the modern day, if I look at something like Lucasfilm, which I think for the most part, whatever gripes people have with modern day Star Wars animation is usually not one of those problems people have. And similarly, things that Disney has been releasing themselves under the Disney Animation banner or through Pixar look way better than the animation here. That's not to say that the animation here is bad, but just that it didn't necessarily soar to the same heights as we've seen from Marvel Animation or the other things dropping on Disney Plus in the modern day. But I do kind of want to still give the animation its flowers, because there are moments where there are really nice shots of certain situations. Some of the backgrounds, especially when you get these wide shots of locations, very much have this painting kind of look to them, and definitely added to an aesthetically pleasing element to the show. But there were just moments in terms of the close-ups of these characters and the way that these characters are designed that I didn't necessarily feel like it was all that good to look at in comparison to other things, again, that Marvel has released. Now, in terms of the story, I thought it was an interesting approach to telling a story, because from the very first episode, we're introduced to the fact that there are a bunch of artifacts that are made of vibranium that the Wakandans need, that have all been spread around specifically due to this one individual who left the Wakandans that they call the Lion. And they mainly deal with the Lion in the first episode, but we, over the course of the next few episodes, follow a different character with each episode as they're going after one of these artifacts. Now, over the course of the show, there are small little Easter eggs and hints and nods to the bigger world, but all of this takes place hundreds of years before the events of the Black Panther films that we would see within the MCU. So if you're going into this expecting something that's really going to tie into the MCU as you know it, I wouldn't say to necessarily expect that. However, on the flip side of that criticism, there is an element to the final episode of the film that in particular does connect itself to the events of the first Black Panther film. I won't say much more as this is a spoiler-free review, but I will say if you're going into this hoping for some sort of connection to the overall MCU, you're probably going to have to wait until that final episode to really get fulfilled in that way, because that's where the show really connects itself to what we know already in the Black Panther universe. And I would say it was all right. I don't think it necessarily does anything substantial that really changes or recontextualizes anything within the world of Black Panther. It does something to make you go like, oh, that's an interesting way to connect that, but nothing that ever really blew my mind. So with all that said, while I don't necessarily put that pressure on every Marvel thing to connect into every different thing, I would have liked to have seen them connect a little bit more at times, but for what they did do, I thought it was fun enough. But in terms of the story it has in general, this was a little bit of a mixed bag for me, because I think that there are episodes that have really cool setups with really cool characters that in turn have some really cool action, but I'd be lying to you if I said that I finished watching this series and I fell in love with the characters or fell in love with the journey that they were on. A lot of the episodes I thought were a lot more fun when there was action going on. The first episode was cool and it was a nice way to set up the series, but I don't necessarily know that it did anything to really impress me. By the time that first episode was over, I thought, okay, that was cool when it came down to the action and some of the visuals, but I didn't really find myself connected to the characters. But I was like, okay, let me see what the next couple episodes have in store. And I will say, with each passing episode, I found myself enjoying the show a little bit more. But by the time I get to the final episode, that was probably the episode that I enjoyed like maybe the best, alongside the third episode. The third and the fourth episode are probably my favorites of the whole series, but I'd be lying to you if I said I fell in love with it. It was a show that was a nice way to pass the time, but I would say is probably on the weaker side of Marvel animation for sure, and probably on the weaker side of MCU Disney Plus shows in general. On one hand, I think there's going to be big super fans of Wakanda, big super fans of Marvel that are going to watch it and have a good time with it, but I do think that there are going to be people who maybe walk away from this series thinking that it just feels like something that they felt they should watch, and then they're going to finish it and think, I don't really know if I feel like I really needed to have seen this. And that's kind of how I felt. As a longtime fan of the comics and just Marvel in general, the movies, the video games, the comic books, as I've already mentioned, it's one of those situations where I watched it because I'm a fan of this world, but I wouldn't say that I was impressed with this project in general. It was enjoyable enough to watch. It's by no means a bad show, but in terms of something I think I'm really going to think about or praise down the line as like a cool thing people should check out, like, oh man, you missed Eyes of Wakanda, you should watch it. I don't really find myself in a world where I think I'm going to be saying that, unfortunately, especially when I think of some of the other cool things that Marvel Animation has already released, most notably things like X-Men 97 or even last year's Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which I thought was a really, really cool new version of Spider-Man in animation. And for me, while Eyes of Wakanda does some fun things at the end to tie itself into the bigger world, it just never really took it to any real great levels narratively for me to ever really care about these characters. Now, there are some fun surprises. If you've seen the marketing, you know that there is an iteration of Iron Fist here, which I guess outside of the Netflix versions, which are now starting to trickle back into canon, this is the MCU's first approach to having an Iron Fist within its canon, though this is set again in the past, so this is a version of Iron Fist. This isn't the Iron Fist that most people think of, specifically Danny Rand. But yeah, it was nice to see them kind of sprinkle in an Iron Fist in here and kind of play with that, and that all added to some really cool action. And I'll just go ahead and highlight that again. If you want some cool animated Marvel action, I think all 4 episodes definitely have some of that. But I'll be honest in saying I don't think it's top tier animated MCU action, especially again compared to the stuff we've already gotten. And I hate to consistently say compare, but like when you have an expectation from a brand, you have an expectation based on the other animated projects they've released under the same banner. And I just don't think that Eyes of Wakanda really hit those levels thematically, narratively, character-wise, or when it comes down to the action. But that's not to say that the show's bad. That's not to say that the show doesn't have its merits. That's not to say that the show doesn't have its cool moments of connection. And that's not to say that the show doesn't have some cool action at times. It just wasn't anything that ever blew me away. I will say, though, that I really enjoyed seeing the different historical settings of each individual episode, as you have episodes that take place in ancient Crete, all the way to Trojan War era Greece, you have ancient China, and then you have late 19th century Ethiopia, giving each individual episode a different look, different kinds of characters in that world, which oftentimes lent itself to different outfits. I just wish I liked the character designs more. There are certain characters that just looked goofy to me in this show and kind of took me out of it, but still, I enjoyed the different historical settings. It made every episode feel and look different. I thought that there were certain characters that were really cool. I just wish there was more of a through line where certain characters trickled into each other's stories. There's only a couple of moments where you see a character from a previous episode appear in another episode, but it's usually very brief, and then that episode is more about this newer character, and you only have truly more like 26 to 28 minutes per episode, including the intro and the credits. So I would say in general, maybe 24 minutes of show every time. So you don't have an abundance of time to really fall in love with these characters. Now, anthology shows in general are all about cramming as much as you can into a small window of time, but I do think that there are anthology shows that just do it better. So in general, that's my thoughts on Eyes of Wakanda, a show that certainly has its merits, a show that's definitely fun to watch at times, something that I think you can easily breeze your time in watching it and kind of get through it in under 2 hours. But it's not a show that I think is going to blow a lot of Marvel fans away. I think if you're a huge fan of Wakanda, you might enjoy certain elements there, but I can't say that this is top tier Wakandan content in any way, shape, or form. There were elements about this that made me think that this would be way cooler as a graphic novel or as a comic book, where I could have envisioned it myself more so than being shown in this animation that didn't really blow me away. So that's going to be my thoughts on Eyes of Wakanda, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. How did you feel about the show? Are you planning on checking it out? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.